tomato plants. It's really the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. And then the other thing is to have enough space. So I recognize the fact that people aren't growing the gardens that they used to grow. When I did my first big book with Larry Sheen back in the 70s, you know, everyone had a pretty good sized garden, but those days are pretty much gone. Now everybody's doing pots and patio planters and things of that sort. But there are still people who are still planting in the ground, and which is great. But the most important thing is to make sure that you have plenty of sun for your tomatoes wherever you're putting them. And the other thing is they need enough space. So they need enough space so you're not overcrowding them. So don't put them too close together. I know it's difficult to, you know, when you're looking at a plant this big that you're purchasing, you know, it's easy to say, well, gee, you know, I've got 3 plants, I can put them closer together. But you really need to put the space of at least 3 feet for most tomato plants, you know. And there's basically 2 different types of tomato plants. There's the indeterminate plant, which is basically grows on forever, and the other is the determinate plant, which most of the hybrids now many of the hybrids are determinate, and that would be early girl bush or celebrity bush. And there's several other varieties, and of course patio, which is a compact plant, so it doesn't keep growing and growing and growing. But the majority of the tomatoes are indeterminate, which means they will grow forever, so long as you have big enough stakes. And that's really important if you're going to be planting it, the indeterminate plants. Varieties and so forth, but as far as taking care of the tomatoes, they like to be fertilized. They like, you know, or organic fertilizer as you plant them. Make sure that they are well watered when you first get them in the ground. That's really important. And then the second thing is that you have to be very careful about is your watering. The worst thing to do is to use a sprinkler on them. You don't want to get the foliage wet. The only thing you have to get wet is the soil. So to water directly on the plant with a sprinkler or something like that is not a good idea, because that's then you're going to start getting fungus. That's when you start getting the leaves on the bottom start turning brown and falling off. And it's a difficult thing to grow in this area in August anyway, because August the air is so heavy, and you're going to automatically get some fungus because of the fact of the heavy air. So be sure to that you don't add to that by sprinkling the plant or by watering the foliage itself. And the other thing is, don't ever water at night. The best time to water is first thing in the morning. That's the first. So that way you have all day long for the sun to dry off all the leaves, and so you don't get the fungus that you'll get on tomato plants when they're either planted too close together, not enough air and light circulation, and that's when the problems begin. So bear that in mind. So, how many people here 6 tomatoes? Wow, this is great. This is good to hear. You know, we sell more single tomato. Everybody buys one big boy, one cherry, and maybe an heirloom, you know. So it's really great to see that people have a plant. So again, be sure that you plant them far enough apart. I'm going to go over some of these varieties. There are so many varieties of tomatoes that you can, and everybody's got the best tomato in the world, you know. I get so many people. I mean, we grow, you know, I don't know what, I didn't count this list, but there's probably around 50, 60 varieties here, counting the heirlooms in the old world. But these are the ones that we found have the best results. I always get somebody saying, oh, I planted your evil purple ball last year. It was the best tomato I ever had. You know, I planted a Cherokee Green. It was the best tomato I ever had. So, you know, you get that a lot. So most of these tomatoes are really good tomatoes, and they do very well. The first 3, they haven't been in alphabetical order, but the first 3 are probably the most popular. The Better Boy, the Big Boy, and the Beef Master and the Celebrity Bush. Those are the most popular of the standard tomatoes. Standard size tomato. As you can see, I put that Celebrity on the top. It's a good tomato for slicing, a good salad tomato. and it grows well. It grows really well. And most farms in this area are planting celebrity growth. That's the one they plant because it is pretty productive. The big boy and the better boy are also very productive there, but they're indeterminate, so they keep growing and growing and growing. When you have an indeterminate tomato, you're going to get side shoots on it, what they call sucker shoots. And the sucker shoot comes from here's a leaf, and it comes between the leaf and the stem. And what you should remove is the first 3 or 4 sucker shoots. They should just be pinched off. My dad had a customer, Mr. Peterson, who lived down Saugatuck Shores when I was a boy. And Mr. Peterson he said that, God bless, he had a really big garden, and he'd only buy half the tomatoes that he needed, and then he would take the sucker shoots and he would stick them in the ground, and they would shoot up another plant. So I always remember that as a boy, that Mr. Peterson said, I only need that. And you know, right after World War I, World War II, right? I am old, but not right after World War II. They planted all the tomatoes, and all the vegetables actually were in a cedar box. It was probably 4 inches deep, and I think it was 12 by 24, and they filled it with soil, and then they planted a 9 by 12 or 108 plants in the box. So that's what you got. You bought 108 plants of tomatoes, 108 plants of peppers, 108 plants of eggplants. So that's how big the gardens were, you know, right after World War II, because of Eleanor Roosevelt's Victory Gardens. And people were planting really big gardens. There was nothing to have a garden that would be 60 feet by 30 feet, you know, which is a lot of space. So that's what we were used to back in the old days, but now everybody's has single plants. But it's important to get those sucker shoots off, because otherwise they're going to take away from the main plant. The first 3 or 4 up until the first set of flowers, and then the sucker shoot underneath the first set of flowers is going to produce another big vine. So what I like to do when I'm planting indeterminate tomatoes, I like to use 2 stakes side by side. So I put them about 4 inches apart, and I use 6-foot stakes. So if you're going to have an indeterminate tomato, you should really have a 6-foot stake if you're going to get a lot of tomatoes. And you take that main stalk and you put on 1 stake, and then the new stalk that comes out as the sucker shoot right under the first set of flowers, that could develop into another stem. And so you have 2 main stems that are going up. So you have like a V. I separate those two stakes with another piece of wood across it, and so they come to a V. It comes to a V in the garden, at the tomato. And so you keep tying it as you go. If you do that and you get enough sun, and the tomato stays healthy, and you fertilize them, give them a good fertilization right about the 4th of July. That's really important. The more water you give it, the more rain you have, the more fertilization you have to do, because you're leaching out the nitrogen. The water leaches out the nitrogen. So you want to keep supplementing it. So my mom she would always fertilize the 1st of July, around the 4th of July, and then she would do it again on the 1st of August. A good handful of organic fertilizer on the top and work it into the soil. Right, suckers as you go, as it goes up. There's no reason why you shouldn't get at least 60 to 65 tomatoes off of one of these indeterminate plants. You know, that's not counting cherry tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes is good. I remember the kids had one tomato plant that they used to count them, and I think they got 265 or something like that on cherries. Cherries you can get a lot, you know. So anyway, those are the main varieties. But then if you go down past the G's, past the grapes, you got Jet Star and Parks Whopper. They're also very good and super fantastic. Those are also really good producing indeterminate tomatoes.
These are all hybrids?
Not really, no. I would say that the Big Boy was the first hybrid that came out. So I would say, yeah, most of them, but I don't think that the Park Swapper, Jetstar, and the Super Fantastic are hybrids. But they are also really good producers. Jetstar used to be a very, very popular tomato for farmers in this area. They would plant Jetstar before Celebrity. That was the tomato to plant. And there's different ways that they stake now. I mean, they stake with stakes every third tomato, and then they run lines, and run them up like trellis. Yes.
When you buy the tomatoes, do they say determinate, indeterminate?
Yes.
On them?
Yeah. Each tag will tell you whether it's a determinate tomato or an indeterminate tomato.
What on the growing them in the same? I've read that you shouldn't grow it in the same spot that you grew it in the year before. Is that not true?
Well, all of the nightshades. The tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes. You should try to alternate the areas, but that's when you had
a big garden.
So you have to be careful and with your fertilization and keeping the garden clean. Keep your garden clean from weeds and insects, and that will. And you got to put your supplements into the ground with the fertilization.
What about the planters? Should be throwing the soil away and starting all over again?
I wouldn't necessarily do that, but it would definitely add my fertilization. It's really important to keep the fertilization in there. That's important. The heirlooms are really a lot of fun to do because of the fact that they definitely have a different taste. The heirlooms that you're finding now in the stores. Like at the fresh market, they're not called hybrid heirlooms, which is a contradiction of terms. So they're called highlooms, and they're all grown in greenhouses. And there's a huge selection of those new varieties, which are terrific. They're really terrific varieties. The problem with what's happened today now is that there's so many greenhouse tomatoes being grown. Many of them are grown hydroponically, but they're perfect. These tomatoes are perfect. So there's no blemishes on them. There's no cracks. So it's hard for the poor farmers trying to pick the tomatoes in the field and say, well, that's a perfect tomato. No, it's not, because it doesn't look as good as the ones in the store. Because all the ones in the store are now coming out of the greenhouses, and you'd be amazed at how many greenhouse tomatoes are being grown in Canada and being shipped to the United States, because the Canadian government supplements greenhouse with their heat and energy. But many tomatoes, greenhouse tomatoes, are being grown in Canada and shipped to the United States. And there's no question about them that they're always perfect. Now, what is the taste compared to what you can get in the garden? It's quite different, as you well know. There's a few of them. In the wintertime, my wife likes the Campari tomatoes. They have a very good taste. They have a good taste. But most of those tomatoes don't have anywhere near the taste that you get from a fresh tomato in the garden. Yes, sir.
Any of these make light resistant?
You'll see that they'll say on the label BMN resistant certain diseases, but not all of them are blight resistant. And this area is, I don't know what it is, but it's I think a lot of it has to do with not enough sun or too much water. But also you can't control the weather here, so that's the biggest single problem. It's very difficult to get rid of the blight once you get it. That's a problem. I think giving, trying not to plant in exactly the same spot is a good idea, and watch your watering. Very, very careful. That's really the most important thing, is not to keep the foliage wet. If you can keep the just make sure you add enough of the fertilization, you know. And the other thing is, I didn't mention lime. It's important that you know, this area in Fairfield County has a very low pH. So that's a problem if you have a pH that's below 6 or 6.5. It should be at 6.5. So make sure you get it. You can get a test. You can get little kits to do it. It's pretty simple. But bring your pH up to at least 6.5. And that could be a problem if your pH is too low. You know, because even if you have all the nutrients that you need, if your pH is too low, they won't take up what they need. You know, so that's important. You can raise your pH by 1 full point, with every 10 pounds of lime for every 100 square feet. So it's pretty easy to remember. 1 point is 10 pounds of lime every 100 square feet. All of these heirloom tomatoes are what we have found to be the best ones, the best results in this area. We've been growing this selection for the last probably 6 or 7 years. And look, there's plenty more. If you have a Johnny's catalog, you get dizzy because there's so many heirloom tomatoes. But all of these that we have found get really good results. You don't get the productivity from heirlooms that you get from these standard hybrid tomatoes. You don't get the same product that I sell at my farm stand, and we sell to a couple of our stores that buy our microgreens. And it's those so-called high looms. They're developed in France, these high loom tomatoes, and they're really excellent, and they're all indeterminate, and they grow in the greenhouse. We stake them with strings going up. You know, and sometimes we have to get out of a little step stool with pick them because that's how high they go. But we get so much production from those high loom. But they're hybrid heirloom tomatoes, and those are the ones you see, and I see them in the fresh market all the time, and they're pretty good tasting too.
I just want to go back to your comment about lime.
Yes.
So when you're looking at fertilizer for tomatoes, will they all have some lime in the fertilizer?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, you're not going to get that.
So the trick is really to check the soil.
Yes, yeah.
And then
The
add
lime
more.
is separate from the fertilization.
Tomatoes that really help them, like
Well, yeah, everybody says you should have basil with tomatoes. I'm convinced that my mother did it out of convenience. If you pick the tomato, pick the basil. You know, so I don't have a
Nothing, yeah.
opinion on it. I really don't. I don't know if it's good or not good, you know. But my mother always planted basil and tomatoes.
Yeah.
Always. You know. Then I just want to go over some of the cherries and the grapes. The most popular cherry tomato that we have had is Sun Gold. It's a yellow cherry tomato. It is by far the best productive. It's the best tasting. It's the good tasting, and we sell 3 times Sun Gold than any other cherry tomato. There's a group of cherries called the Bumblebee. They have Sunrise Bumblebee and Pink Bumblebee and some other bumblebee. They're all pretty good. One cherry that we have this year that we haven't had before is the 5th one on the list, which is the 6th one, the cherry chocolate. People have been asking for that, and so Kevin and Joe said to me, "Why don't you do that for a little bigger?" I like to use the grape tomatoes in my salad because I cut them in half. You know, and so they're fun in the salad, and they all taste great. I mean, every one of them is good. You know, Juliet I think is probably the most popular of all. The Sugary is good, and Valentine is a good one. They're all good, and the Solid Gold is that Nova is a yellow one, and the older one. I put on my in here the Goldie. You know, people keep asking about that. Goldie is a tomato that's in a shell, and so you have to peel it. It's great for kids. The kids love it because they can pick them and then they peel it, and then it's so sweet. It's such a very, very sweet tomato. So you see that under ground cherry Goldie. They call it ground cherry. It takes up a lot of room in the garden. It doesn't grow up. It's sort of like indeterminate this way. It doesn't go up. So it just goes, it spreads out almost like a squash plant. But you get a tremendous amount of production, and children love it. Kids just love to go in there and pick them and feel the shells and pop them in their mouths. So I put that in there just so you can see what they look like. And then there's the plum tomatoes. It's interesting how many people are buying the San Marzanos. I think we're getting more people buying San Marzanos in the last 3 years. I don't know whether it was because of COVID and people getting more into the gardening, but we never sold as many San Marzanos as we're selling today. And we have 3 varieties of San Marzanos. One is my mom's tomato, which, by the way, she started her own seeds, and she used to pick the best seeds, and which I still do at the farm. I do that every year. And in fact, high mowing seeds or organic seeds in Vermont has Nana Gilbertie's plum tomato. But I really don't think it's the same, because hers comes to a little, if you look at it, it's the bottom of the last tomato on this list I took a picture of. It has like a little point at the end of it, whereas the one I bought some seeds from High Mowing just to try them out, and they're not quite the same as the ones that we grow, that my mom used to do. And believe it or not, she got it from a German grower up in Cheshire, Earl Kurtz, Mr. Kurtz. Do I have any questions? Yes.
Steaks or cages?
Well, cages are easier than steaks, but I think with a determinate tomato, you can use the cages. You're probably better off with the cage because you can get, so long as you can get into them and reach in. But with an indeterminate, I certainly would not use a cage because they're not tall enough. They're going to get up here and they're going to fall over. So you really need the stakes. And then, the other thing which I never mentioned, when you get to September, okay, the 1st of September, about Labor Day, pinch the top off, just break it off. So don't let it go any further, because it's going to get a frost in the 1st of October. And so you're wasting, unless you want green tomatoes, unless you're looking for green tomatoes at the end, So just break the top off on Labor Day. Yes. I think that the celebrity I see where it gets really heavy with a lot of suckers. So I always cull them out, take a few out, just to give it more air and light, circ 85 or 94. Labels started getting to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. You see now you're looking at labels before you're looking at the plant. And now with the high-tech stuff, there's so much information they can put on a label. But people were starting to complain that the label's too big, And so I said, well, let's have a garden club and the Westport Garden Club. And there was probably maybe 20 ladies at each one. And I had a little thing, what would you like in a label? And they all came up with like a small label that you could put, made out of wood, they put in the garden. So we designed this that looks like wood, this snap-off tag that you can put in your garden. So the big label you can take and file it away and read that, and this one could identify the plant in the garden. So especially like herbs and well, vegetables, they get big, so it doesn't make too much difference. But with the herbs, we designed this label so that you can snap it off. And it was really a good thing because everybody loves the label, and it helps you in the garden to make your garden look nicer. You put them in the ground for about a foot. You put them in side by side like this, straight down, okay? And then you're going to bend it like that, okay? And then you got to get another little board to put across from here to there. So you make like a V with a,
Cool, thank you.
okay? Just like that. And then you have two different stems going up. Yes.
Would you put coffee grinds on tomato soil?
People say they should, that it's a good idea. I don't know. I don't know. I've never done it, so who knows? Everybody got a little trick, you know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yes.
What do you recommend by way of soil composition?
Well, you know, now there's so much stuff coming out of the coast of Maine, and a lot of other companies that are doing what he did, which was a great idea, because basically he took what the old farmers used to do, seaweeds, and and what the Indians did. They put a fish in the ground when they planted a tomato, you know. And so he went up to Maine, and he had a buddy that was into the business of gathering seaweed, and he started making this different compost, and he was smart enough to bring in some engineers who knew scientific engineers who knew what plants needed, and so he developed so many different composts from Maine that are excellent. They are just excellent. They supply pretty much all the nutrients that you need, and you can mix it in with your soil, and you've got everything you need right there. You have to supplement afterwards during the course of the season, of course. But that's, to me, the coast of Maine is the best thing that you can bring in to your soil. And you can talk to Joe or Kevin here, because they're really privy to and savvy about it, about what you can use and which ones to use for your, especially for the vegetables. And it's all organic.
How often should you water?
Well, I always used to fight with my mother because she loved to water. I used to try to take the hose out of her hand.
Every day is okay?
No, that's too often. You know. When you water, do it well. You know what I mean? This sprinkling doesn't do a good job. You know, that's why a soaker hose is really good, because you really soak it. And you can, depending upon the weather, of course. Depending upon the weather, sometimes you can go for a whole week without watering it. You know what I mean? You don't want the tomatoes to start wilting and you're really dry. But you know, they definitely need water, but you don't want to drown them. You don't want to drown them. So I mean, you can tell if the soil is all you got to go down is an inch from the top, and you see if it's wet, you know, if it's too wet or not, you know. But if it's, you know, if you get a lot of rain, that's tougher. The organic fertilizer that they have out here, I don't know, are we using Sustain here or not? Do they have Sustain?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, they have Sustain and Azomite. If I use those two together, just a mixture of Azomite and Sustain, I think Joe Gloria will be able to sell you that in 70 days. You'll see some that say ripen in 94 days, 96 days, as a matter of fact. But the bigger the tomato, the longer it takes to ripen. So, but if you want the same tomato, or you want a good sized tomato, the ones that come early, like Early Girl, you know, it's a smaller tomato. It's not going to get bigger, you know. So, but if you want big tomatoes like the Big Boy, I think is in 80 days. So you can look at the labels again, but usually the tomatoes that take longer are bigger. So that's the only thing.
Just it's not getting cold by the time they need to ripe.
Yeah. Otherwise, yeah. Well, I know. I mean, that Nana's, which I plant a bunch of them in my garden because I want the seeds. You know, I take the biggest tomato and I make the seeds from it. Sometimes I'm picking them the 1st of October. You know, because it takes a long time. Because they'll keep coming. Yes.
I don't tend to get cracks in the larger tomatoes, but I always get cracks in the cherry tomatoes.
Watch your labels, because they'll say doesn't crack, or you know, because there's some varieties that just naturally crack. They crack a lot, you know. So I noticed that Sun Gold does not. You know, Sun Gold is one that was some are developed so they develop them and hybridize them so they don't crack, you know. But mostly the small tomatoes will crack if you leave them on too long. They just crack. And yes.
I like to use the cherry tomatoes in cut flower bouquets. Can you recommend a kind that has the small tomatoes with a sort of a truss?
None of them that I have.
Okay.
there's a few varieties that are out there. Burpee has one. I can't remember what they go. I mean, Sweet 1 Million is probably the smallest.
Yeah.
You know, Sweet 1 Million has it. But Burpee has one, and I can't remember the name of it. Oh my God! And I mean, it'll throw a stem about this long, you know, with tomatoes all the way down. I mean, it's so pretty. You know, it's you hate to start picking them, you know, because they look so nice. It looks like grapes, you know, coming down. I can't remember the name of it. I wish.
The Sweet 1 Million sounds like a good suggestion.
Yes.
Best.
Well, you know, either if you want a good sized tomato, you have to plant Celebrity. That's the only one you can put in a container. Or Patio. Patio is a good one. I mean, that's why they developed that Patio tomato. But Celebrity Bush is probably the better one.
Celebrity is determinate.
Determinate. Yeah, so you can put it in a container.
What is your process for saving seeds?
Well, I don't have a machine to do it.
No.
Yeah. But I pick out the biggest. My mom taught me to pick out the biggest and the nicest looking tomato, you know. And I take the biggest ones and I put them aside, and then I'll, you know, get the seeds out, like slice them and sometimes if I don't wait too long, I can use the tomato and eat it, you know, after I take the seeds out. And then I put it in a sieve. And then I wash them, just wash them down and spread them out and let them dry, and then that's it. I mean, how many times do you get volunteers in the garden? You know, especially with cherry tomatoes. All of a sudden, how come I have all these cherry? My tomato plant came back from last year. It's not really that tomato. It's a seed that dropped and became a new tomato. We get that all the time. All right, tomato came back from last year. But not all of them work because they bring in bugs too. So and the Santolinas will keep insects away, and they'll keep. And then also, you know, all of the alliums, which, you know, garlic, chives, shallots, they will keep a lot of things away. One of the most effective botanical sprays that you can use, because it's also will help with fungus. Neem will also, so any neem product will do a good job. But you got to keep up at it. I mean, you're talking about an aphid on tomatoes?
Yeah, little green aphids all over it.
Huh, that's interesting.
On the plant.
Yeah. See, we bring in beneficials, so we don't have that much of a problem. We do have occasionally, but we do use neem, and we also use MP, which is basically insecticide with soap. Those two things. A guy by the name of Richard Gerhardt, and he was in Boulder, Colorado, and he was working with farmers out there, and he was bringing in beneficials from Holland. The Dutch are way ahead of us in this stuff. And I remember him saying to me, he said, "Sal, now remember, the beneficials will keep your house clean." Talking about greenhouses. They'll keep your house clean, but they won't clean your house. So, which means that you can't wait for an infestation to bring them in. You got to bring them in ahead of time. So there's lots of places where you can bring in beneficials, you know, that you can buy beneficials. They have some things here, but there's lots of places that will ship you beneficials. But you can bring them in. White fly used to be a big problem with us, especially with lemon verbena. So we started bringing in this parasitic wasp called Incarcia formosa. But we bring it in every week, you know, to keep for 6 weeks in a row. And then they do produce their own, and then we don't need them. Yes?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I had a big white fly infestation on my tomatoes last summer at the end of the season. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Just sort of appeared all of a sudden.
the average female whitefly lays 800 eggs. You know, so she has 800 kids at a time. So,
What did you say you brought in?
Incarcia formosa. Incarcia formosa, which is a parasitic wasp. But you got to bring them in ahead of time. You know, so I got it toward the end of the season. Start bringing them in June, and have them come every week for 6 weeks. You know, and you don't need a lot.